Welcome to the Elite Athlete Podcast. I am Dr. Nicole Tatro, and I'm here to help you unleash your peak performance and dominate your sport with fierce confidence and unstoppable energy. Whether you're a high-level athlete, a dedicated parent, a coach, or an agent, this podcast is for you. Get ready for ultimate strategies, expert insights, and cutting-edge tips that will take your game to the next level. We'll also cover personalized blood work analysis to provide unique insights that can transform your performance. We'll explore personalized health, optimized nutrition, and powerful recovery techniques. Whether you're on the ice, the field, or in the gym, together, we'll unlock your true potential and make your athletic dreams a reality. Let's do this, because greatness is within you, and it's time to unleash it. All right, welcome back to the Elite Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nicole Tatro, and today I have a treat for you because I have my good friend Trevor Jewett with us today. Actually, Trevor and I, we've known each other since we were really young, and we are cousins through marriage. That's what we used to say, right? So no blood relation, but we've been connected for a very long time. So thank you so much, Trevor. Trevor is a licensed clinical mental health counselor. He is a certified clinical trauma professional, a certified Vermont recovery coach, and a lifelong drummer. You're still drumming away, aren't you, Trevor?
Yeah, whenever I can.
Awesome. I love it. I love seeing some of your posts, both professional around drumming and personal around drumming on social media. It's very cool. So thank you so much for being here, Trevor. You and I decided before I hit record, we decided that we are going to try to go for a no edit interview here, right? We could do it.
Yes.
We're both authentic people, so it is what it is. We're real humans.
Yeah. I would imagine, can I jump in right there? Like the therapist in me wants to capitalize on that too, right?
Course.
Like even if we fumble, like I could imagine that translates to sports and athletes as well as the rest of life. Like there's a lot we can learn from that.
That's a good catch. I love it.
But when we try to edit everything, that's where we get into trouble.
So true. I think we could go on a huge tangent on that, couldn't we? With today's world and technology and what people are showing on the social media, speaking of social media. But what I wanted to talk about today we've been connected, like I said, for a very long time. And speaking of social media, I shared a post the other day. The caption of the post said, "Don't coach who they are, coach who they can be." So I was thinking, this is wonderful for my athletes. And Trevor commented in there and I said, "Oh my gosh, we need to have a conversation." So how do you feel about that caption that I shared? Tell me a little bit about your thoughts around that.
Sure. Well, it definitely struck me. And if I remember right, my immediate impulsive response was same as therapy.
I think that's what it was, right? And I'm like, ding, 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 he needs to be on my podcast.
Right. We don't treat the person for who they are. We treat the potential that we see in them. And imagine if we could help someone do that. Imagine if we did that with everyone. Imagine if we did that with ourselves, right? Treated our potential. Often we're very scared of our potential, which is a whole nother ball of wax. But yes, it just, I think it's absolutely right. And I have a metaphor. Can I share a metaphor?
You can share. This is your thing. You go for it.
Okay. So it's summertime in Vermont and a lot of us are gardening, right? So a couple of things about that is we don't treat the seed. We don't put the seed in the dirt for it to become the best seed possible, right? We put the seed in the dirt because we know its potential. That if we take care of it with the right nurturing, soil, water, sunlight, it's going to do what it knows how to do. We just have to create the conditions for that to happen. So I just thought there's all kinds of metaphor for this treating the potential, and we do it all the time. We just don't necessarily recognize that that's what we're doing. So I thought the planting the seed analogy, we're okay, you're going to be the best seed ever, right? Because then we're teaching the seed that all it ever can be is a seed.
Wow.
But we let it go. Okay, you can be a beautiful cucumber one day.
I love it. That's what I'm going to say to my kids when I'm having them do all the healthy things that I try to educate them with. You want to be a healthy cucumber, a beautiful cucumber, right? That's amazing. I love that. So tell me a little bit about how you go about that in your practice. How would that how can my listeners, which are you the high level athlete, the athlete that's striving to be high level, the parents of those high level athletes, maybe their coaches, maybe even their agents and advisors. Those are the listeners for this podcast. So I would love for you to share a little bit more. Could you go into that a little bit more, if you don't mind?
I'll absolutely do my best.
Mm.
Even though we're going for a no edit interview here,
Ah,
I'll clarify that like high level sports is not necessarily my wheelhouse. However, I think some of these strengths based or potential based mindsets apply across the board.
for sure.
Uh, what I see, like at least in therapy, is people come in with a deficit mindset already. Like something's wrong. I'm not enough. I need to do this. I'm not enough just as I am. And when we can help people point out all the things they have done and are doing, all of a sudden the game changes, right? So I can imagine when you're striving to make it across the finish line or improve, we're constantly trying to improve.
Right.
We can lose sight of the ground we've already covered, right? And so if you've shown that you have the potential to make it this far, maybe it's to qualify for an event, to make it to a certain round in an event, then there's a lot of evidence that if you just keep applying that and treating the potential, that it will continue. Right now, there's a lot of hard work that goes into that. It's not just that easy, but I find helping people recognize their inherent strengths. And it's a human thing, I think, to come in with a deficit mindset. I have to do more. I have to do this. I have to do, and that can freeze us up a little bit.
No, I think that's really big in the athletic world. Like right now, I'm in the middle of coaching travel softball. So higher level athletes, but young athletes. These are 12U, so some of them are just barely 13, but we're dealing with 11, 12, and 13-year-old females that are playing softball. So it's very interesting. I'm also surrounded by older teenagers, early 20 somethings that are striving for the next level in hockey. But I
Mhm.
think that there's always like, oh, I got to do more to get in that starting lineup. I've got to do more and more and more. So I think you're definitely onto something there for sure. So what advice then? I know I'm putting you on on the spot here, but what advice would you have for myself as a coach or other coaches that might be listening? How can we make sure that we foster this in a positive way? Because we do want them to strive. We do need our players to, you know, do the next thing, the next level to compete because the competitiveness is just it's just getting harder and harder, right? So I don't know.
Sure.
Do you have any words of advice for us as coaches
Mhm.
when they come in with that deficit mindset? Um, I mean, I guess we just need to keep telling them they're already good enough, right? But I feel like in a sports situation in the heat of the moment, I bet that's sometimes difficult.
Yeah, I think, it's one thing for like a top down affirmation, a purely cognitive affirmation, like you're good enough, right? Just saying that, it doesn't make it past that defense. That's like, no, I'm not. The core belief that's already in
Yeah.
there, that's reinforced by the environment of the competition, right? So it's a really challenging place to be, to operate within that. Although that's the reality, and there is an objective here to work within that framework, right? And to get better. But I think really capitalizing on those moments that happen in real life. So whether that's a stolen base from someone who maybe wouldn't have taken the risk to steal a base before, and you can see their inherent like, whoa, I took a risk and it paid off.
Yep. Like
Right? So
those small wins, right? Like celebrating those small wins.
and encourage positive risk taking, right?
Mm.
There's a chance you might get tagged out. Absolutely. But guess what? You're never going to make it if you stay on first base.
Yeah.
or I think it's Gretzky who said, you miss 100% of the
Yeah.
shots
That's
you don't.
exactly where my mind went when you said that, because that's a
Right.
very famous one. Famous.
So in that regard, the deficit would be you got tagged out, but the strength would be, it was like, you gave it a shot. You used to hang out on first base and super scared to even try. So there's still a win in here.
I think I'm very blessed when I'm coaching and I choose my assistant coaches, or if I'm an assistant coach and my head coaches. I've been very blessed with having pretty positive coaches, especially for this young age. I obviously am not coaching the high level hockey that I just mentioned. That's out of my scope. But
Mhm.
I've been very, very lucky. But I know that we've played against teams that I don't hear the positive stuff coming out, even in a game in front of other people. So I can't imagine what like practices might be like. It's a little bit scary. But I love that. I feel like I'm very big on that. Like I joke with my girls about how it's not just about the game. I teach corny life lessons at the same time, and they
Absolutely.
just, they like roll their eyes at me. But I tell you, I'm dating myself, but I've been coaching for several years. So I now have girls that are moms, and they reach out to me, in social media. They still call me coach, and they'll say like, "Hey, I remember when you said this." So it makes me have goosebumps. But you know, being a coach can be in such an influential it's such a position of influence in
Absolutely.
in so many aspects, not just about the game. So
Mhm.
I don't take it lightly when I'm coaching these young girls. Um, so yeah, I appreciate that, because I love that, because if you didn't take the risk, how are we going to know,
Right. And then celebrate that they took the risk.
Yeah.
Like assuming this is someone who played it safe before because they didn't believe in themselves. Right. So like appreciating the strength that they took the risk would be treating the potential. Right. Like coach who they can be, because if they keep practicing, they'll make it, they'll get that stolen base. Right. If they keep practicing, their hitting will get better. Right. That kind of thing.
This past season, in regular season, so we have different levels. So regular season, we have a variety of talent during regular season. We want everyone to be included and to play. It's not a tryout situation where that's what I'm coaching right now, because that happens in sports, right? Sometimes we try out and we don't make the team. But in my regular season, I had an incredible assistant coach. He was wonderful, and he would remind me like certain positions, since we're on baseball and softball, the corners are really important, right? I mean, obviously pitching and catching, but the corners, I mean, every position, I could argue every single position, right? But let's just say like for, throwing someone out at third or first, you need the catcher to be able to throw the ball, and you need the person to be able to receive and make the tag.
Mhm.
And, a couple times I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know if she'll be able to do that." And he looked at me and he's so calm, and he said, "We need to let her give it a try." So he brought me back into reality, and we did, and there was, failures and successes with that. So that's what I was thinking about when you brought that up. So, not just as thinking about the athlete doing it, but like as the coach allowing those situations to happen and trying to bring someone out of their comfort zone. You never know. These
Right.
girls, I
Well,
hope they're not at their peak, right? Like, they're just
right.
barely starting to grow into the sport if they continue.
I would imagine as a coach, there's a bit of positive risk taking in there too, in that there's pressure as a coach, even in lower pressure environments. We're humans. We want to do our best, right? Um, but the coach has to take the risk of putting this person who doesn't have a lot of experience at first and give them that shot. And you have to take the responsibility of, at the end of the day, like I'm mostly a believer, not someone who's in this world, but like the team success is the coach's success and the team setbacks are the coach's setbacks. So the coach has a role in that positive risk taking too. And like, oh, I hope for this kid that they get it this time, for their confidence, for their this, for their that. Because if it goes the other way, it could set them back, right?
Yeah.
Or we could lose the game and then, oh, I got this other thing to do. So we have to model I think if I had advice to give to coaches, like model making mistakes, right? And trying again and taking risks, that kind of thing.
And maybe even owning it, right? Like
Totally.
labeling, knowing, naming it, owning it, and then, something we do right now in our current team is when there's a mistake, um, both by a coach or a player, we encourage everyone to acknowledge it, flush it, and then we move on because that next play might be seconds later. It might be next inning, but it could be seconds later that you get another ball hit to you or whatever. So,
Mhm.
um, it's a lot. It is. There is a lot of pressure on coaches, I think, at all levels. I have not gone past the high school level, which can get very intense when it comes to, like, playoffs and things like that. But, it's not like I've hit college or prep school level
Or
but it's still, I think you're right. It can be very intense. So I hope the coaches listening either have a thought about it right now or can at least resonate a little bit with it.
sure.
So let's maybe it's not switching gears at all, but so Trevor, a lot of um my main philosophy with what I've created, the elite athlete, is about their internal stats, right? Like,
Mhm.
they can go to a strength conditioning coach, they can go to the skills coach, they learn they have a defenseman coach, they have an offensive coach, they have a shooting coach, all of these different things, right? But if
Yeah.
their internal stats aren't well or aren't, working well in harmony, we can argue that they're not going to be able to reach their peak potential. Now, I'm working a lot with blood work and DNA and just, nutrient timing and all of that stuff. And of course, the mental piece comes in, but I'd love for you to share a little bit about the importance of that, mind body connection, that mental health connection, especially if you can relate that to the athletic world. I know you played some soccer when we were in high school.
Mhm.
Um, would you be able to do that for us?
Well, I'll certainly give it a shot. And this is an area you may need to slow me down a little bit because this is something I've always appreciated that there's parallels in our work. I'm of the opinion that we do our clients grave mistakes by thinking mental health is from the neck up,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? It's in our bodies, it's in our cells. And I believe that our vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve that connects all our major organs to our brain, right? So if you're in a situation, let's say you're, I don't know, an endurance runner, your breathing and so on takes on a huge role because you're working with your autonomic nervous system to maintain a certain amount of regulation or dysregulation to keep you moving forward. So there's so much to that. Um, so I think under pressure, it's really important to be able to slow down and like regulate that nervous system a little bit. Or I talk about getting in out of our downstairs brain and into our upstairs brain, where we can actually access those skills that we have spent hours and hours and hours and hours perfecting. We have some muscle memory to it, but if we become overly stressed and get caught in our downstairs brain, that stuff goes offline. So now all of a sudden we may be in the batter's box almost shaking, that kind of a thing. And that's where we lose it. So a certain amount of just being mindful of what's going on inside at any given moment. Now, a certain amount of anxiety, especially in an athletic situation, is good and helpful, right?
Yes.
We don't want to be lethargic going into like 100-meter dash.
A lot of my girls, I ask them how they're feeling, and I even though we've had a few games now, nervous, and I'm like, "Good."
Right.
Because if you're not, that means you know what I mean? Like, I don't get
Mhm.
sciencey on them, but, I love that you said that.
Yeah. Well, having things be dysregulated or high levels of adrenaline is not always a bad thing, right? Like, so if we're feeling pressure in a race or something and someone's on our tail, we're going to feel that pressure and that can help us.
Right, we don't wanna be meditating and doing yoga moves at that exact moment, right? There's a
Well,
time and place
precisely.
for all
So
of these things.
if I could relate that to trauma work a little bit, I use this analogy often. Like if we're out in the woods and all of a sudden come face to face with a bear, we want that adrenaline and cortisol to kick in yesterday. So we can either fight or flight, right? That's to help us. Where it becomes problematic is when the bear comes with us. Like when we're responding as if there's a bear where there isn't one. And that's what can get us into trouble. And I imagine that makes its way onto sports fields as well.
Absolutely. I talk about that in my in-person clinic. When we're in that small room, I said, okay, so imagine a lion comes in this door right now, and then we talk about the autonomic nervous system and how it'd be good at a certain point. I said, however, if this lion stays here the whole time and then tomorrow and the next day, so my analogy always is a lion.
Okay. Any carnivorous large
Right.
mammal.
Anything
Or
that's a little
the
bit
analogy.
scary. It might be even a spider for some people, right?
Yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. And then, coming back to the athlete, it's like all the same. We don't know what's happening in their home environment. Like we can't control all this environmental stuff.
Right.
We're in the world right now with all kinds of political stress, environmental stress. Like we don't realize how much stress is coming, into us that we can't necessarily control. So it's
Right.
like we need to figure out a way to control our internal stressors. And then that's when I kick in my, internal stats of let's take care of the inflammation. Let's take care of the infections that are kind of low grade and hanging out. So that's kind of my wheelhouse, is to be able to help that body handle those things so that we can make the better decisions and handle the environmental stress. Like that lion that's way off in the distance, that kind of stuff.
No. Right. It's not about avoiding stress all the time. It's
Right.
about having the capacity to work with it. Because in life, life is stressful. There's going to be stressors we're going to have to develop resiliency to work through. So that's where I think all these things like getting into our upstairs brain, checking on inflammation, the internal stat stuff too. Like those are all skills.
This is incredible stuff. And I just feel like when we're talking about that athletic population, a lot of my athletes are young right now. So it's like they can work through some of this stuff and still be successful. But what happens, like, can you imagine if they took care of some of these things, like how much more successful they could be? And later on, they won't know this, but when they start getting our age and a little bit older, those things really add up. So I'm hoping that I can shout this to the rooftops to try to teach these athletes that they're putting a lot of demands on their body on top of the typical demands of a human. They're adding demands. And then not to mention, we haven't even talked about trauma and things like that could be happening to each of these individuals, even though we don't see it on the outside. But it's just, if we could catch them now, I just can't imagine how much better off they'll be in their 30s and 40s and 50s. So I'm trying to shout it out there.
Yeah. Well, I'm there banging the drum with you. And it's really tough because dating ourselves, we grew up, there was stress in life, but it wasn't in dating us like it is now. We can't get away from it. We literally carry it with us.
I was gonna pick mine up. You beat me to it. It's not far from my hand and I'm right there. And my kids are the same. My husband and I feel like we gave them devices too soon, but it is what it is. And we're working through it now, but it is unbelievable.
Yeah. This is a reality that we live in and that athletes live in, that people live in, so yes, it's the uphill swim, like the stream that's coming down at us has gained a lot of current.
Totally agree with that. So you mentioned, it was kind of a nice little segue, your drums, your favorite thing. Can you tell us a little bit about what you got going on? So I hear a lot about this, the drumming. Like, what are you doing with that right now?
Well, so that was a bit of a pandemic project.
Yes.
And this is, I'll relate it to especially team sports here too, I think. that as a lifelong drummer, I've always been wanted to incorporate drumming therapeutically somehow. Just never knew how. So during the pandemic, I got intentional and took some trainings to be able to deliver group drumming for wellness, for connection, those kinds of things. At the end of the day, we are mammals, and mammals need each other to literally to survive. Like the Stephen Porges, who developed something called polyvagal theory, which has to do with our vagus nerve, says co-regulation, like our ability to be present with another, is a biological imperative, right? We can't do it alone. So getting people together in groups was born from this idea too. Like, let's get people together to do this. We've been isolated so much lately.
Wow, right?
Almost during the pandemic. So getting together, and when we are in rhythm together, when we get going with a rhythm, very basic rhythms, you don't have to be a professional musician or anything, but the research shows that between 4 and 6 minutes is when our brain waves begin to entrain. So we literally all start thinking the same way. Not the same ideas, but there's an inherent connection that happens. Over time, our breath will sync, our heart rate will sync. It's all this stuff called entrainment, which is really, really cool. And it happens implicitly, right? It's happening through our bodies, which is really cool. It's not like getting someone together and going on a chalkboard and saying, how can we connect with one another? Like, oh, how many of you like cheeseburgers? You go over here, right? That's all that cognitive stuff. This makes it implicit. So people, different political views, different athletic abilities, whatever, you put them together, and then all of a sudden there's an implicit connection that happens. Actually, I did do this. Some folks might be familiar with the Green Mountain Valley School in Waitsfield, that they have athletes from all over the world come to it's professional skiers from like ages this high to whenever. Did some work with them as athletes, team building and that kind of thing, which was
very
pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, as you were talking, I'm like thinking of my teams that I'm involved with, like, should we do something like this? Because we're constantly talking as coaches, how can we get them to bond off of the field and, forget about, like, a lot of them are competing for the same position and the spot in the lineup. So it's like, how can we remove that barrier and have them connect as a team? Because that's what, I tend to be more drawn to team sports. And we're at the time of this recording, we're in the middle of the Olympics. So I have no problem with non-team sports as far as individual like events and things like that. I'm just less familiar with that. But as far as bonding a team together, like this might be something that we need to think about.
There was a subtle plug in there.
I figured.
Like, okay, I know the audience you described. I'm like, I'll just put this out there.
Yes. Well, why do you think I mean, I don't just bring on anyone on these interviews for my podcast, but that is really fascinating because, we get together, we did a dinner the other night and they had pizza and salad and some cake together. There's but this is like next level stuff. And that's what I love. I love next level stuff. The innate stuff that they don't even know that we're making them bond together.
Well, precisely. I like to say, so our ancestors, tens of thousands of years ago, didn't get together at the end of a day of hunting and gathering or whatever and say, you know what, guys, let's get together and co-regulate. Right? Like, let's entrain our brainwaves. They just intuitively know that if they danced and sang and chanted and drummed, that they would feel better. Now we have the neuroscience to describe what's going on. And the more I've learned about it in the more recent years, as I took some trainings on it, I'm like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. So it's kind of cool nerding out.
Well, you know that I love doing that almost every interview that I do or anything that I'm talking about. I'm like, well, this is kind of sciencey, but I'm a nerd about it. I love it. But I think that you're onto something really big. Now, how are you going to scale it with just yourself? Because my listeners aren't just in our little corner of Vermont, they're going to be all over the place. So this is very, very fascinating stuff. I think that anybody that wants to get their team together on a, you know, what kind of level do you want to call it? It's not like on a really connected level. Like this
Mhm.
is interesting stuff. And I would feel like most athletes would be drawn. This would be fun for them. Like I have
Yeah.
not taken one of your classes and I feel embarrassed. I should actually, because then I would really be able to explain it. But I feel like this would be a really great athletic avenue for people.
Yeah. Well, it absolutely can. And it's so accessible, right? Like everybody's a drummer, just not everybody knows it yet. Right.
Yeah.
So if you can bang on pots and pans, you can do this stuff. And that's what makes it accessible. It's kind of fun. How am I going to scale it? Great question. I'm still kind of building this thing as I
Yeah.
go. I'm always going to be a therapist first.
Yep.
That's where my heart really is.
Hmm.
This is a nice augment to that and getting to
Yeah.
work with different populations. And I get to learn a lot.
But I think it's still connected. Like you're still the therapist when you're leading this group. So I think that, I don't know. I just think it's the whole you. I do think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
to get the science, like the biological benefit that you
mhm,
just discussed, do you have to be in the same room? Or could you do this virtually? What if you were leading it? And this is a complete, like, real honest question.
sure.
Like,
Yeah. Well, online drum circles did become a thing during the pandemic. Um, Latency becomes an issue,
yeah, that's what I
real
was
a
wondering.
little bit, but here is what some people do is they will have their own audio on that's presenting and going to everyone's, let's say, Zoom account. Everyone else though is muted, so you're not hearing 100 people all over the world just
Yeah,
going
yeah,
crazy.
true. Okay.
You're just hearing the facilitator in
And then
yourself.
you can follow it, right? Maybe?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly, and
interesting.
they'll do play-alongs to different like, play a song, almost like drumming karaoke, and you get to jam along to it, or sometimes we'll try a rhythm. I haven't done too much of that, but they're out there.
Yeah. It seems a little less, it's almost like, in my world, do a lot of manual therapy. Some of the techniques, the very holistic manual techniques that I've learned, they can do distance. And I'm not saying that I don't believe that, but it's just I haven't done it that much because I feel there are you can send intentions, distance wise, but I just feel like it's in my wheelhouse is actually being present in the same room as somebody
Yeah,
when it
in
comes to
fact,
manual therapy like that.
absolutely. Well, a lot of things, and there's articles now that have researched this, like, online meetings versus in-person meetings, and I forget the percentage. It was, close to 50%, if not more, neural activity happens
Yeah.
when we're in person. Like we lose so much in a situation like this, even subtle things like that we might not even pay attention to, but like if you're in your office, there may be a subtle smell. Maybe you have a diffuser in there.
Oh,
I
I
can't,
yeah,
can't pick on that now.
that's so true, yeah.
Right. We also have mirror neurons in our brain that are picking up on the expressions of people around us. And those are inhibited online too, through the pixels. So the connection does become
Yeah, that
damn.
makes sense.
Yeah, there's been a lot of research on this since the pandemic. So, does that mean throw out the baby with the bathwater? No, but there are differences to
Yep,
consider.
yep. Obviously, yeah, like, you have to weigh out if you can't physically go, so if that's your only option. Very interesting. I might wanna think about this. So when people come to you, do you have a studio, like, or do you go to places? I know that sometimes I think you set up in, like, a gym or like
Mhm.
a YMCA or something, I'm guessing. What happens? Like, how does that all work out?
Yeah, I contract with organizations and I'll go to them.
Got it.
So whether that's a school or a treatment center, um, athletic facility,
Sure.
we do up an agreement that you have a space that can get loud and you have chairs, and then I'll bring, I do this part, you do that part, and we work together to tailor it to the organization.
Very cool. Very cool.
Coming back just real quick to the, like the physiology piece and the science piece, it's very subtle, but with the drumming, what also makes it very important to be in the same room is there's air moving. Every time we hit a drum, it's moving air around the room.
Oh.
And we notice that. Not necessarily like, oh, I can feel the air, but in the absence of it, you would notice a difference.
Very cool.
That's another reason to be in the same room.
That's very interesting. Yeah, my mind is spinning because when I hear something that that's how I am. I'm a lifelong learner. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so intrigued. And especially as a coach and with children that play sports, I'm like, wow, this is very interesting. That would be very cool to bring into the team sport world.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Very
cool. Awesome. Well, I think we've said a few things. I'm sure that I'll probably have you on again. We can have other topics. I try not to make my interviews too long because I want people to take little nuggets of information so they can take action steps on it. So again, I'm putting you on the spot, but I'd love for you to leave us with some sort of a thought or one more last tip. What are you thinking, Trevor?
I guess I'll go back to the potential thing if I can for a minute. I use this analogy often in therapy, and I wonder if it could be applied to high level athletes. It comes back to this idea of creating the conditions, right? Trusting, like the conditions may be that we practice this day, we do this, all these other things, but at the end of the day, trusting in the potential. So this is another metaphor, and I'm going to use a metaphor of a broken bone in a cast. So if we break our arm, we go to the doctor. Doctor puts a cast on our arm, and over the period of weeks, that bone will heal. The cast itself doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't go in there and put the bone back together.
Right.
It holds the space. It believes in the potential of the bone, knows it has the potential to do that. We just have to give it the conditions necessary to do that. And I think all the things that you've talked about as a coach, those conditions include those internal stats, right? The life skills that come along with it, in addition to the very explicit skills of running, throwing, whatever the exercise is. So thank you for being a cast for your athletes.
I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have a super busy schedule. I appreciate your time to educate our audience on some things that they could work on. And maybe if the parents are listening, let your athletes listen or at least try to implement some of these things. It is so important to be looking at the whole athlete as a whole person, mind, body, everything. So
Right.
Wonderful. Thank you, Trevor, for being here. I really appreciate it. Where can they find you if they would like to find more information? I will certainly take your information and put it in the show notes, but would you like to put a little plug in there
Sure.
for where they can find you?
Sure. Probably the easiest is my website, which is www.restoringrhythm. So RESTORING. See how I did that in rhythm?
I love it.
RESTORINGRHYTHMVT.com. So Trevor that's my email is trevor@restoringrhythmvt.com. The web address is www.restoringrhythmvt.com.
Perfect. Wonderful. I will make it easy on everyone and put that in the show notes when we get this recording out so that you can just cut and paste or click on it. If you have more questions for Trevor, I'm sure that he would be happy to answer those for you. So again, thank you, Trevor. I really appreciate your time. And thank you all for listening to the Elite Athlete Podcast. I will see you and you will hear me in the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Elite Athlete Podcast. I'm Dr. Nicole Tatro, and I hope you found today's episode inspiring and empowering. If you're ready to take your performance to the next level, don't miss out on my free instant access 3-day workshop series, Elevate Your Game and Dominate Your Sport. In this workshop, you'll discover natural recovery secrets, bloodwork insights, and the truth about supplements to help you achieve peak performance. Sign up for instant access today and start your journey to becoming the elite athlete you're destined to be. Visit the link in the show notes and join now. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share it with fellow athletes, parents, coaches, and agents. Your support helps us spread the word and elevate the game for many more athletes just like you. Remember, you have the power to achieve greatness. Let's do this together. Until next time, keep pushing your limits and stay unstoppable.